A boardroom on the 17th floor. 12 people around a table made of wood, old enough to have absorbed every decision this company ever made, and a woman standing at the center of it, holding 24 pages. 3 weeks ago, she was mopping the lobby downstairs. Nobody in this room knew her name until 40 days ago. Nobody asked. Not once in 14 years, across the table, a woman in a silver bob sets down her pen the specific way you set something down when you've already decided it's over. She has been on this board for 16 years. She has flowers sent to every executive's newborn. She poured tea from white porcelain and smiled while handing over a folder designed to erase this woman from the building entirely. She thought she was dealing with a janitor. She was dealing with someone who reads 8 languages, 6 years of contracts. One pattern nobody was ever supposed to find. Nadine Okafor opens the folder, and the room stops breathing. She had a system. Most people didn't notice. That was the point. Card on the left. Supplies arranged by frequency of use. Mop bucket wheels facing outward so she could move fast without turning around. 14 years of small refinements. 14 years of learning exactly how to exist in a space without disturbing it. Without disturbing anyone in it. The lobby of Tate & Associates on a Monday morning was its own kind of weather system. Unpredictable. Occasionally violent. Always loud in that particular way that has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with density. Shoes clicked against the marble floor like a percussion section that had never once rehearsed together. Coffee cups appeared and disappeared. Phones were pressed to ears before elevator doors had finished opening. People talked about deadlines the way other people talked about fires. To them, it was. Nadine Okafor moved through all of it the way water moves through a crowded room. Around things, between things, never against anything. It was a skill she had developed so thoroughly over so many years that it no longer felt like a skill. It felt like breathing, like the particular way her body had learned to take up exactly the right amount of space. Not more, never more, and leave everything else undisturbed. She was 44 years old. She had been 44 for 3 weeks. Nobody at Tate & Associates knew that. Nobody knew much of anything about her, which was something she had made her peace with. Somewhere around year 7, or maybe year 9. She couldn't recall the exact moment the peace had settled in. Only that one morning she had woken up and the ache of it, of being invisible in a building full of people, had simply become background noise. Like the fountain in the lobby corner. Always there, never noticed. She understood that fountain completely. Her uniform was burgundy, a specific shade that someone at corporate procurement had selected from a catalog years ago and never revisited. It was the color of dried roses, of old velvet theater seats, of something that had once been vivid and had quietly, without announcement, become something else. She wore it without thinking about it anymore. That, too, was the point. It was 7:52 in the morning. She was working the east side of the lobby. Long, measured strokes with the mop. The floor didn't actually need it. She'd done this section 20 minutes ago, just after unlocking the supply room, and before the first elevator brought down the first of the early arrivals. But a coffee spill near the reception desk had dried wrong overnight, leaving a residue that ghosted the marble in the morning light if you knew how to look for it. She knew how to look for it. That was something invisibility gave you. Over time, when people stopped seeing you, you started seeing everything else with a clarity that was almost startling. The way the third elevator from the left always paused half a second longer before its doors opened. Something mechanical, something that maintenance had been meaning to look at for 2 years. The way the reception desk's corner lamp cast a shadow at exactly the wrong angle on Monday mornings, which was why Brianna, the receptionist who'd started 3 months ago, always looked more tired than she actually was until she moved the lamp at 8:15 and forgot to move it back and did the whole thing again the following Monday. She noticed all of it. She noticed the man in the gray suit who held his coffee with both hands even when it wasn't hot anymore. She noticed Bernard at the security station, favoring his left knee on cold mornings with the careful nonchalance of a man who considered admitting physical limitation to be a kind of surrender. She noticed Courtney from the 4th floor marketing team, who always arrived 7 minutes before her colleague Beth, always checked her phone immediately, always looked faintly disappointed by whatever she found there. 14 years of noticing. 14 years of filing it all away in the particular mental archive that people develop when nobody is asking them to share it. She had a very large archive. The elevator banks were on the north wall, 4 of them, chrome doors that Nadine had polished so many times. She could find her own reflection in them without trying. She tried not to look. Not vanity. The opposite. She had the specific relationship with her own reflection that women develop after years of a tiredness that doesn't wash off with sleep. The kind that lives in the body. That comes from carrying things alone for so long that the weight stops registering as weight and starts registering simply as the baseline condition of existence. At 7:58, the third elevator from the left opened, and Russell Tate stepped out. She knew who he was. Everyone in the building knew who he was. He was 54 years old, silver at the temples. The kind of posture that doesn't come from good schools, but from a man who had decided quite deliberately, at some point in his 40s, that he had earned the right to stand in a room without apology. She had seen him before, in the halls after late meetings, in the lobby during early arrivals. He was always in motion, always purposeful. He was not typically a man who stopped. Except, he stopped. She didn't register it immediately. She was focused on the residue near the reception mat, getting the mop's edge underneath, where the rubber had lifted slightly at the corner, where the dried coffee had wicked into the fiber. Not the right tool for this, strictly speaking, but she'd learned to work with what she had. That had been the primary education of the last 20 years. Not language, not linguistics, working with what you had. The voice pulled her attention upward, not because it was loud, not because it was commanding, because of what language it was in, and because of the particular quality of ease it carried. That specific fluency that isn't performed, that lives in the body the way a native language lives. The way you can hear the difference between someone who learned a language and someone who simply has it. Mandarin, flowing, warm at the edges. She looked up. A woman in a burgundy uniform, herself of course, standing near the lobby directory touchscreen, speaking to a man in a dark navy jacket, thick-rimmed glasses, 65, maybe older. The particular look of someone who has arrived in the right building in the wrong decade and is being too polite to show how lost he feels. She was explaining. Calmly, her hand gesturing toward the elevator banks, then toward the overhead signage. The man's shoulders came down, that specific visible release that happens when a person finally understands what someone is saying to them. Not just the words, the meaning behind them. He nodded. Said something brief, she answered. Even briefer. He bowed slightly. She dipped her chin in return. He walked toward the elevators, and she turned around, and Russell Tate was standing 6 feet away from her. Oh. That was her first thought. Just oh. Her second thought was a rapid and not entirely dignified inventory of the immediate area. Floor still slightly damp near the mat. Had she put out the wet floor sign? Yes, she had. It was 2 feet to his left. He wasn't going to slip. Cart, positioned correctly, not blocking traffic. Herself upright, uniform clean, nothing about her appearance that should be the source of whatever current lay on GC's expression. That was the thing. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't the particular blankness that most people defaulted to when they registered the cleaning staff, the careful non-seeing that wasn't malicious, just habitual. It was something else. The specific look of a person whose brain has just run a search and returned a result that doesn't match the expected parameters. He was trying to categorize what he'd just heard and finding that his existing categories weren't sufficient. "Excuse me," he said. She straightened. Set the mop handle against the cart. "Yes, sir." That was Mandarin. "Yes, sir, you speak it fluently?" She looked at him, not defensively, not with the preemptive apology that sometimes crept into her voice when she could sense a person was about to be surprised by her in a way she hadn't earned through their surprise. The particular accommodating flinch that decades of being underestimated can install in a person if they're not careful. She'd been careful. For a long time, she'd been careful. "Yes," she said. He observed that. The way someone absorbs information that requires actual processing. Not the instant nod of a person who already knew what you were going to say. A real pause, real intake. "Spanish?" he asked. "I came through the side entrance earlier. There was a delivery man near the dock. She hadn't known he was there. He'd been watching from further back than she realized." "Yes," she said. "French, yes." A beat. He was giving her room. Recognized what he was doing. creating space for her to elaborate, to fill the silence with more information, the way people do when they're genuinely curious and don't want to appear to be interrogating. It was a considerate instinct. She acknowledged it internally. She did not fill the silence. Not yet. Not until she knew what he was going to do with it. "What else?" he asked. Finally, she unclipped the mop from the bucket holder, set it straight against the cart, turned back to him, squared her shoulders. Not aggressively, just fully. The way you stand when you're about to say something true, and you want your posture to mean it. Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili, Pos, and Latin. I don't count that one for practical purposes. Most linguists don't. Russell Tateup blinked once, slowly, the specific blink of a man whose internal spreadsheet has just returned an error. That's 9 languages. 8 conversational. 9 if you include Latin, which is a reading and writing competency rather than a spoken one. He looked at her. And the thing about being truly looked at, not past, not through, actually at, was that Nadine had become so unaccustomed to it that she felt it physically, like a change in air pressure, like walking out of a dim room into actual sunlight and needing a second to adjust. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nadine Okafor." "How long have you been here, Nadine?" She held his gaze. 14 years, she said. "I started in 2010. Something moved across his face. Not pity, she would have recognized pity immediately, would have categorized it, and closed the door on the conversation. This was different. The specific quality of a person realizing they have walked past something significant repeatedly, without seeing it. The discomfort of that. The honest, self-directed discomfort. "I'm Russell Tate," he said. "I know who you are, sir." The corner of his mouth shifted, something approaching a smile. "Of course you do." He glanced toward the elevator banks, then back. "Are you? Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk to you." Her first thought, am I in trouble? Her second thought, what did I do? Her third thought, the one that embarrassed her slightly. The floor on 18, I did it last Thursday. The finish is good, at least that won't be an issue. "Now," she asked, "if you're willing." She looked at her cart, the mat, the residue she hadn't quite finished, the second floor east corridor that was waiting, and the bathroom restock that needed to happen before the 9 o'clock surge. And Bernard's station floor that wasn't the pattern of high traffic wear and needed buffing. She looked back at him. "All right," she said. The elevator was different from the inside when you were being carried rather than cleaning it. She couldn't explain why that should be true. Same chrome walls, same faint hum, same vague residue of someone's cologne from an earlier ride. But the numbers climbing upward felt categorically unlike anything she had experienced in this particular box of metal and glass before. 3 floors in silence. "I've seen you before," he said. Not accusing, working something out. Most mornings and some evenings until about 4 years ago. Evenings, nights, night shift originally. I transferred to mornings in 2020. She glanced forward. My daughter was in school. I needed to be home when she got back. How old is she now? 26. The number still occasionally surprised her. She's a nurse. In Tempe, Arizona. He was quiet for a moment. "You raised her alone?" "Yes, while working nights." "Yes." The elevator opened on 18, the executive floor. The particular smell of it. Something between leather and citrus. The smell of money if money had a smell, which it did. She had cleaned enough rooms where it lived to know. Settled around her as she stepped out. His assistant, a young man named Patrick, who moved through his days at approximately the speed of controlled anxiety, looked up from his desk with an expression that went through several phases in rapid succession. Recognition, surprise, rapid reassessment, professional neutrality. He landed on the last one. Russell nodded. Patrick understood. They went through. The office was glass on 3 sides. She had cleaned those windows. She knew which panel caught condensation from the building's north-facing HVAC exhaust, and which corner required a specific cleaning solution to prevent water spotting. She knew the world map behind his desk. The one with the colored pins had a small tear at the lower left corner of its frame where the paper backing had lifted in the dry winter air. She'd taped it from behind in December 2022 when she was cleaning, and it had bothered her aesthetically. She had not mentioned this to anyone. She sat where he gestured, chair across from the desk, folded her hands in her lap, not as a performance of deference. She was done performing deference, had been done with it for years. But because her hands needed somewhere to go, and she was thinking about too many things simultaneously to decide what else to do with them. The office told her things, the way rooms always did. The world map, active, current, recently updated. Several new pins in East Africa and the Gulf that hadn't been there 18 months ago. The photograph on the side, credenza. Two girls, one maybe 12, one 15, laughing at something off-frame, with the specific full-body joy of children who haven't learned yet to manage their reactions for an audience. The trade award from 2019, that leaned 3 degrees to the left because one of its mounting screws had stripped. She had noticed that in October, had wondered briefly if she should mention it, had not. Russell Tate sat across from her, leaned forward, not over his desk, not into her space. Forward in the way of a person who is actually paying attention rather than performing it. There was a difference. She had learned to read that difference in the first year of working here. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "I wasn't expecting this conversation when I walked into the building this morning." I gathered that. Something shifted in his expression. Amusement, maybe, mixed with something more serious. "What I mean is, I heard you speaking to that man in the lobby, and my immediate assumption was that it was one of our international sales representatives. Someone who'd come in early." He paused. "Not someone in a cleaning uniform," she said. "Not sharp, not wounded. Just finishing the sentence for him because they were both adults, and the sentence was true and dancing around. True things, wasted time that she had learned long ago was too valuable to waste." He held her gaze and did not look away. "Yes, that's exactly it, and I'm not proud of that assumption. But it's what happened, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She studied him for a moment. She had developed, over 14 years, a fairly sophisticated taxonomy of the people who said things like this. Most of them meant it in the moment and forgot it by Thursday. The sentiment without the substance. The acknowledgement without the aftermath. But he was still sitting here, still looking at her. His phone had buzzed twice since they sat down, and he had not touched it. "You want to know how it happened," she said. "I want to understand if you're willing to tell me." She looked toward the window, one that caught condensation, the one she'd taped in December. Then back at him. "You got time for the real answer? I wouldn't have asked for anything less." She started with Akron, Ohio, because that was where it started. Not the languages, the foundation that made the languages possible. Her father was a floor engineer at a steel mill. Not management, not white collar. The kind of man who could diagnose a mechanical problem by listening to it, and who came home smelling of iron and effort, and who read 3 newspapers every Sunday in 3 different languages. English, Yoruba, and the French paper he ordered by subscription, and which arrived 4 days late, and which he read anyway carefully, with a dictionary at his elbow. Because he said the same story sounds different depending on who tells it, and you need all the versions to understand any of them. Her mother was a registered nurse. Night shiftist mostly. The specific tiredness of someone who had chosen a hard thing because it was the right thing and who never complained about that choice, but who also, sometimes, fell asleep in the kitchen chair, still holding a cup of tea she'd forgotten to drink. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. They were not the kind of family that appeared in these stories people told about exceptional children rising from exceptional circumstances. They were ordinary people who had decided, with great seriousness and consistency, that their daughter would have access to every door that language could open. Because language, her father said this, in English and then in Yoruba so she would understand it, was the one key that could not be taken from you. She had believed him. She had believed him so completely that she had built her whole early life around it. The scholarship to Ohio State. Full ride, linguistics major, applied linguistic theory with a focus on multilingual cognitive frameworks, which was a very long way of saying she was fascinated by the way language shaped the architecture of thought. The way a grief that Arabic could contain in a single layered word required an entire paragraph to approximate in English. The way the Swahili concept of time operated on a fundamentally different axis than the Western model, not better or worse, just differently organized, which meant that translation was never just about words, but always about worlds. She loved it. The way some people love mathematics or music, not as a skill to acquire, but as a way of seeing that made everything else make more sense. She was 23. She was in the 2nd year of her master's program. She was writing a thesis on cognitive load and multilingual switching that her advisor said was the best original research she had supervised in 11 years. And then her mother called. Ovarian cancer. The diagnosis that arrives and immediately divides everything into before and after, as cleanly as a blade. She came home. Her father tried to hold on. He lasted 7 months. Then a stroke took him. Fast, without warning, without the particular cruelty of a long goodbye. And she was 24 years old with a 2-year-old daughter named Zora, and a mother who had made it through surgery but needed help getting to the hospital twice a week, and a half-finished thesis on a laptop. She put in a box in the closet and told herself she would come back to. She had not come back to it. She needed Russell Tate to understand something about this, and she said it plainly, without softening it or dramatizing it, because it was true, and she had spent enough years with the truth of it to know exactly what shape it was. It wasn't surrender. It was a choice. Between two things I loved, I chose the one that needed me more urgently. I had a daughter and a sick mother and no one else. I chose to stay. She paused. There is a difference between giving up and choosing something harder. I need that to be clear. Russell Tate looked at her for a moment. It's clear, he said quietly. She nodded. My mother passed in 2008, she continued. Zora was 4. I had no degree, no specialized credentials, and the economy was well. I remember what 2008 was, he said. Then you know. I took what I could find. Grocery stores. A care facility for 2 years. I was good at that. Talking to people was always what I did best. Temp work. Anything with hours that let me be home when Zora needed me. She paused. A custodial supervisor named Richard offered me a night shift here in 2010. $14 an hour, full benefits, and I could be home before Zora woke up for school. That was the equation. She met his eyes. That's how I got here. The office was quiet. Outside, 47 floors of a company moved through its Monday morning. Phones and meetings and spreadsheets, and all the business of a world that had not noticed the woman in the burgundy uniform, keeping its lobby clean for 14 years. But the languages, Russell said, I never stopped. No decoration on those words, no apology in them. Just truth, said, the way her father had taught her to say true things, without ornament, because ornament was for people who weren't sure what they were saying and needed decoration to fill the gaps. I borrowed textbooks from the public library. They had a decent language section, and I had a library card I'd held since I was 7 years old. Audio courses on CD, later on MP3 players when those became cheap enough. Foreign language newspapers from a specialty shop downtown that discounted them at the end of the month. She looked down at her hands briefly. I read to Zora in a different language every night. French on Mondays, Spanish on Wednesdays, Arabic on Fridays, Italian on Sundays. She didn't know she was being taught. She thought that was just how stories sounded. Different, depending on the night. Russell was very still. She grew up bilingual without trying, Nadine said. Picked up Spanish and French the way children pick up weather, just by being in it. A pause. She speaks 4 languages now. She doesn't make a big thing of it. To her, it's just what language is. Something you have more of, if you pay attention. And for you, he said. 14 years of being the most multilingual person in whatever room I was cleaning. She said it without bitterness, without irony, as a statement of simple, verifiable fact. Most people never asked. They saw the uniform. They completed the sentence the uniform started. And that was that. She let the words sit between them, assumed. He was quiet for long enough that she could hear the building. The low hum of the HVAC, the distant percussion of elevator mechanics, the muffled sound of a conversation somewhere down the executive hall. There's something else I should tell you, she said, before you decide what this conversation is. He waited. 3 years ago, 2021, I was working the 3rd floor evening shift, the international conference suites. He went still in a different way now, attentive. The specific stillness of a person who senses they are about to hear something important. Your company had a delegation visiting from Dusseldorf. Mid-level executives, logistics division. I was working the supply closet around the corner from the main conference hall when they came out to the corridor between sessions. She kept her voice level, factual. They weren't trying to be private. They spoke German to each other because they assumed nobody nearby could understand them, which was a reasonable assumption. But you could. I've been reading German trade and industrial publications for 8 years. The vocabulary, the register, the specific idioms of logistics and supply chain. I know it the way I know all the others. From the inside. He was leaning forward now, slightly. What were they saying? They were preparing to walk away from your contract. She watched his face. Not because of the deal terms. They found the terms acceptable. Because of a translation error in the German language version of the contract documents. Someone had rendered the English phrase, upon delivery, as nach Abnahme. In standard German, that's fine. But in the specific text of German industrial logistics, particularly for a delegation from the Dusseldorf manufacturing sector, where Abnahme carries formal inspection and acceptance implications, it reads very differently. They believed your company was attempting to shift the liability window. They thought it was deliberate. The silence that followed had weight. They were leaving, she continued. They had already decided. The session after the break was going to be a polite withdrawal. What did you do? I went back to the supply closet. Found a notepad, loose-lined, standard stock. Wrote out a clarification. The correct phrasing, the intended meaning. A brief explanation of the discrepancy and how it could be resolved. 2 paragraphs. I folded it and left it outside the conference room door, with a note that said it was from building services. She paused. Then I went back to cleaning the corridor. He stared at her. The contract was signed 2 weeks later, she said. I don't know the exact value. I saw the celebration on the 14th floor from the supply closet when I brought up fresh towels. Russell Tate sat back in his chair, slowly. The movement of a man processing. Something that is actively rearranging his understanding of the last 3 years. Why didn't you say anything? He asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. The real question him steadily that she looked at him, because, she said, I knew exactly how that sentence would sound. Excuse me, Mr. Tate, I clean your conference rooms and I'd like to discuss your international contract language. I knew which face would be on the other side of that sentence. I had seen that face my entire career. She kept her voice even. I wasn't wrong to know that. He held her gaze. He did not argue with her, which was its own kind of answer. They had been talking 26 minutes. She knew because she tracked the way people track time when things depend on them. Automatically, continuously, without having to think about it. The 2nd floor east corridor. The bathroom restock. Bernard's station floor. I'm going to ask you something, Russell said. And I want you to know that regardless of your answer, this conversation doesn't go anywhere you don't want it to go. She waited. There's a meeting this afternoon, 2 o'clock. A delegation from Sao Paulo. They arrived 2 days early, and our translator had a family medical emergency this morning. We're managing it, but managing it badly. He looked at her directly. It would be Portuguese. She looked at him. He's serious, she thought. He is actually serious. She had developed, over decades, a fairly reliable instrument for detecting seriousness versus performance of seriousness. The instrument had been calibrated by many disappointments and a smaller number of genuine surprises. The instrument said, serious. Brazilian Portuguese, she said. Not European. Sao Paulo, yes. The lead is from the Sao Paulo metro area. Her team is mixed, one from Belo Horizonte, I believe. She nodded once, thinking about the specific register of Sao Paulo business Portuguese. The way it softened certain consonants that Lisbon Portuguese hardened. The particular rhythm of formal address in a Sao Paulo boardroom versus a Rio one. I can do that, she said. He reached for his notepad, wrote something. She didn't look, that felt presumptuous, and set the pen down. I'll have Patrick coordinate with your supervisor. Coverage for your remaining shift, access to the conference room materials beforehand if you want to review them. I'd like to review them, she said. An hour before, if possible, done. She started to stand. Nadine. She paused. He was holding a folder. She recognized it. It had been open on the corner of his desk when she came in, the kind of half-reviewed document that waits on a desk during the first hours of a Monday morning. He held it out to her. Before you go, would you mind looking at something? She took the folder, sat back down, found the relevant section with the efficiency of someone who had been reading complex documents in multiple languages for 30 years. The international trade terms had structural fingerprints. She knew the way a doctor knows a chest x-ray. The shape of what was there and what shouldn't be. She found the Arabic section on page 9, applied it, then the English, then back to the Arabic. Set her finger on section 4. May I? She indicated the pen on his desk. He handed it to her. She marked the passage in the English version, then the corresponding line in the Arabic. The English reads upon delivery, she said. Arabic reads the equivalent of upon receipt and verification. In standard import-export contexts, that might be a minor distinction. But given the nature of your Dubai partnership, freight with extended inspection windows, the verification timeline could be invoked to delay payment indefinitely without being technically in breach. She looked up. This would have been a significant problem. He took the folder back, looked at the pages, then at her. This translation was provided by the firm we've used for 6 years, he said. She kept her expression neutral. The skill of keeping her expression neutral was one she had honed so thoroughly over so many years that she could now do it while thinking about 12 things simultaneous, which she was currently doing. Because she had seen the name of the translation firm. Small logo, bottom right corner of the page. Elegant, restrained. She had seen it before. She was almost certain she had seen it before. She filed it in the archive, next to the 17,000 other things she had noticed in 14 years of cleaning this building while nobody was looking. Errors happen, she said carefully. This is the second one you've identified in under an hour. She said nothing to that, because there was nothing to say to it. That wouldn't sound like something she wasn't ready to say yet. I should get back, she said. I have the second floor before 9. He stood when she stood, which was a small thing which she noticed in any way. Thank you, he said, for the truth. She thought about all the years the truth had been sitting quietly in a burgundy uniform, waiting for someone to ask. Thank you, she said, for asking. She rode the elevator back down alone. The numbers descended. 18, 15, 12, 7, 3. At 2 soon she caught herself in the chrome doors. Burgundy uniform, cart badge number 00847. The mop handle she was still holding because it had simply never occurred to her to set it down. She looked at herself for 3 full seconds, which was longer than she normally allowed. Well, she thought. That happened. She did not let herself spiral into what it might mean. She had learned that particular discipline, the discipline of not counting things that hadn't arrived yet, in her late 20s. After a period where she had spent too much energy on hope that moved faster than reality could follow. But she thought about 2 o'clock, about Brazilian Portuguese and Sao Paulo, and the specific warmth of that language in her mouth. The language she had learned from a radio station she'd found by accident at 2 a.m. during a night shift 6 years ago, playing music she hadn't been able to name but had recognized as something she wanted to understand. She thought about the folder, about page 9, about the translation firm's logo that she was almost certain she had seen somewhere else in this building, in a different context, in a different corridor. She filed it. The elevator opened. She walked back out into the lobby. Back into the marble and the shoes and the coffee cups and the fountain that nobody ever stopped to notice. She retrieved cart from where she'd left it and found the mat with the residue she still hadn't finished. She finished it. She was thorough like that. By 10 o'clock she had completed the second floor, restocked 3 supply stations, assisted a Spanish-speaking visitor who had come to the wrong building, and confirmed with her supervisors, a man named Ron, good-natured, perpetually mildly overwhelmed, that coverage had been arranged for her afternoon shift. Ron had looked at her with the expression of a man who had received instructions that surprised him and had decided his job was to execute them rather than understand them. Mr. Tate's office called, he said. I know, she said. You're going to a meeting this afternoon. I know that too. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You need anything? An hour with the meeting materials before 2 o'clock. Patrick said he'd send them to your phone. She nodded. She did not have the kind of phone that received the kind of documents a Tate & Associates executive assistant typically sent. She decided this was a problem for later. Ron, she said. Yeah. The water pressure in the 3rd floor north restrooms is low again. Left faucet, middle sink. It's been intermittent since last Thursday. Maintenance needs to check the valve. He blinked, then wrote it down. Okay, he said. She nodded and went back to the supply room to organize her cart for the afternoon. She called Zora at 11:15 from the supply room, standing among the shelves of microfiber cloths and floor solution, and the specific kind of quiet that industrial spaces have when everyone else has gone elsewhere. Hey, Mama. The Arizona warmth in her daughter's voice. The voice of someone who had woken up easy that morning and was moving through her day with the confidence of a person who knew what they were doing and why. Hey, baby. You okay? I had an interesting morning. A pause. Define interesting. I'll tell you tonight. You always say that. And I always tell you. Eventually. Zora laughed. Love you, baby. She hung up, stood in the supply room for a moment, looked at the shelf in front of her. The microfiber cloths organized by color: white for surfaces, blue for glass, green for floors, yellow for bathrooms. She had organized them this way in 2014, and they had stayed organized this way ever since, because she had never stopped maintaining the system, even when no one asked her to, and even when no one noticed. That was the thing about systems. You built them because they worked, not because someone was watching. She had been building systems her whole life that no one was watching. Today, for the first time in 14 years, someone had watched, and then asked. She pulled out the folded piece of paper from her pocket. She had printed it before leaving the 18th floor, using the small shared printer in the executive hallway, with the quiet efficiencies of someone who had learned to move through faces without drawing attention. The translation firm's name, their registered address, the logo. She looked at it, set it in her supply room locker. She needed to remember where she'd seen that logo before. She would remember. She always did. It was one of the things she'd kept sharpest over 14 years, when everything else was in a supply closet waiting for the right moment. Her memory and her languages, and the particular kind of patience that comes from knowing exactly what you are worth, even in a world that hasn't asked. Especially then. The Sao Paulo meeting lasted 43 minutes. It felt like 12. Not because it was short, because Nadine forgot to watch the clock. And forgetting to watch the clock was something that had not happened to her in a professional setting in a very long time. She was a person who tracked time the way sailors tracked weather, constantly, automatically, with the understanding that ignoring it had consequences. But at 2:07 in the afternoon, sitting at the far end of the conference table in room 4C, in a burgundy uniform that nobody had thought to offer an alternative to, and that she had not asked about, she forgot entirely, because she was working. And when she was working, genuinely working, using the things she'd kept sharpest through 14 years of borrowed textbooks and late-night radio stations and newspapers bought at end-of-month discounts, time operated differently. It compressed. It became irrelevant. There was only the language in the room and the specific human business of making sure that what one person meant was actually what another person received. The Brazilian delegation had walked into room 4C with the particular alertness of people who had crossed time zones on short notice and were running on professionalism and caffeine. 4 of them. The lead was a woman named Adriana, maybe 50, silver-streaked hair pushed up with reading glasses, the bearing of someone who had run enough meetings to have developed strong opinions about the ones that wasted her time. She had looked at Nadine's uniform, then looked away. Then, because she was the kind of woman who had learned to pay attention to her own thoughts, looked back. Nadine had held her gaze, not challenging, not apologetic, just present. "Let's see what happens," the stillness said. What happened was this. Nadine opened her mouth and Portuguese came out. Not careful, studied Portuguese. Not the kind that sits in the throat and has to be retrieved consciously. Kind that lived in her body. In the specific rhythm of Brazilian intonation she had spent 3 years learning from radio broadcasts and regional journalism, because she had understood early that Portuguese from Lisbon and Portuguese from Sao Paulo were languages that had grown up in different houses and developed different habits, and you needed to know which house you were visiting before you knocked. Adriana's pen stopped moving. She looked at Nadine fully, and then, for the first time since entering the building, she smiled. Not the professional courtesy smile, the real one. The one that reaches the eyes because something genuinely unexpected has occurred. The room shifted. That was the only precise word for it. A shift. The way a room changes when people stop performing and start actually talking to each other. Shoulders came down. Pens were set rather than clicked. The younger man in the delegation. Dark jacket, nervous energy. The one who had been watching the door since they sat down, finally stopped watching the door. Nadine translated in both directions without thinking about the act of translation. That was the mark of real fluency, when the language came invisible. When you stopped being a conduit and became a participant who happened to move between 2 worlds simultaneously. A joke appeared midway through the meeting. The younger man made it, dry, quick, and colloquial Saulo Portuguese, that would have baffled a standard interpreter and simply vanished from a machine translation. Nadine laughed, genuinely, and then translated the joke with its humor intact. not flattened into the colorless summary that killed most humor in professional settings. Both sides of the table laughed. Russell Tate, sitting at the head of the oval, watched the laughters with the expression of a man witnessing something he had not planned for, and was trying to understand why it was working. He caught Nadine's eye briefly. She looked back at him, even, and kept working after. The delegation was escorted to the lobby by Patrick, who was efficient at escorting, regardless of how much internal recalibration he was doing simultaneously. Russell spoke briefly with two of the executives near the door. Standard pleasantries, the kind that meant the meeting had gone well enough that pleasantries were genuine rather than obligatory. Adriana paused at the conference room door. She had her bag on her shoulder, her reading glasses back in her hair, the look of a woman who has made a decision and is going to act on it before the moment closes. She turned back to Nadine, looked at her, not at the uniform, not at the context of her, just at her, and said something in Portuguese. 4 words. Direct. Você fala como alguém que ficou. You speak like someone who stayed. Nadine held that, turned it over. Then Adriana nodded once and walked out. And Nadine stood alone in conference room 4C, with the empty water glasses and the abandoned notepads, and the particular silence of a room where something real had just happened. She stood there for 45 seconds, which was exactly how long it took her to remember to breathe. Russell found her in the hallway 2 minutes later. He had the look of a man who had been moving toward a specific conversation since approximately 2:43 p.m. and was not going to let anything intervene. The lead partner, he said. What did she say at the door? Nadine considered. She said the translation was excellent, which was true, just not complete. Some things you hold, not because they're secret, but because they belong to you. Because in a life that had given her very little that was entirely hers, she had learned to identify the things that were and keep them carefully. They want a follow-up meeting, Russell said. Standing agenda. Thursday of next week. He paused. I'd like you at that table. She looked at it. In what capacity? That's the conversation I want to have tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock, if you're willing. She thought about the second-floor corridor, the bathroom restock, Bernard's station, all the things that would be waiting, the way they always waited, the way things waited, for a person who could be counted on to show up. I'll be there at 8, she said. Lean back. Nadine. Her name said, like it meant something specific, not departmental, not transactional. What you did in there today, that wasn't just translation, you know that. She held his gaze. I know, she said. And she did. 8 o'clock the next morning she was on 18 at 7:42. She had used the extra 18 minutes to finish the lobby floor. Old habit, the kind that had been installed too deeply to override with something as recent as a promotion, and had ridden the elevator up with her hands all folded in front of her, and her pulse doing something she didn't entirely endorse. It's a conversation, she told herself. You've had conversations in 9 languages. You've explained German industrial contract law from a supply closet. You translated a Sao Paulo business meeting in a cleaning uniform yesterday and the room laughed at your joke. You can have a conversation. Patrick looked up when she walked in. His expression had evolved since the previous morning. Less surprised. Something that might, given time, become straightforward respect. She went through. Russell was already at his desk. Coffee black, half finished. The world map behind him had moved on. Sit down, he said. Not brusque, comfortably. The way you say it to someone whose presence you've already decided is not a problem, she said. Cultural liaison, international affairs, he said. She made him say it twice, not because she hadn't heard him, because she had developed a specific immune response to forward motion that arrived faster than she'd earned through its arrival. 14 years had given her that. The discipline of not counting things until they were real. Say that again. He said it again. She looked at the world map. All those pins. All those places where someone needed to be understood and wasn't. All those rooms where language was a wall. And people were throwing documents at it and hoping something translated through. I don't have a degree, she said. I know no corporate certifications, no management training. Nothing that would appear on a standard qualifications checklist. I know all of that. I've been cleaning this building for 14 years. Nadine, he leaned forward. You saved a contract worth over $1 million from a supply closet notepad. You identified 2 translation errors in under an hour. that 3 rounds of legal review missed. And yesterday you turned a room full of executives who had flown in exhausted and were ready to be difficult. You turned them in 43 minutes using nothing but who you already are. He paused. Tell me what piece of paper on earth is worth more than that. She was quiet. Is this real, she thought. Is this actually happening? People will say things, she said. Yes, people who've been waiting for advancement. People with credentials and tenure, and strong opinions about how these decisions get made. Also true. And that doesn't concern you. What concerns me, he said, is this company's international relationships failing because we keep handing them to people who read a contract but can't read a room. He held her gaze. You read rooms the way most people read English. Without effort, without even noticing you're doing it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, because something about his expression reminded her of her father, the particular way her father had of stationing drinks and waiting for her to receive them without decorations, she exhaled. There's a clothing stipend, he said. HR will handle the details. And that was the sentence that made it real. Not the title, not the description of the role, the clothing stipend, because nobody invents a clothing for a moment for committed to. All right, she said. All right, yes. She straightened, the particular straightening of a person who has decided. Let's see what I can do. He extended his hand across the desk. She shook it, firm and clean, no hesitation on either side. By Wednesday, the building knew. Not the full story, just the shape of it. And shapes, in a building of 340 people with functional email and excellent elevator acoustics, were more than enough. The whispers began on 4 and moved in both directions simultaneously. Russell Tate promoted the cleaning lady. She speaks like 9 languages or something. Which one? The one who, just ask Patrick. Patrick had developed by Tuesday afternoon the expression of a man who has answered the same question 17 times and is considering whether early retirement is actually an option at 31 on the 4th floor break room at 12:23 p. On Wednesday, a conversation happened that Nadine was not present for, but heard about later through the specific information network that exists in every building and that most management teams pretend doesn't function as efficiently as it does. 2 marketing assistants. Graduate degrees mentioned frequently, the particular grievance of people who had done what they were told to do and were watching someone else's different path produce a faster result. 22 months, one said. I have a master's from Georgetown, international business, and I've been. I know, the other said. This woman was cleaning restrooms last week. A pause. 2 floors below us, she added, in case the geography softened it. Nadine heard about this. She did not address it, did not explain herself, did not compile the inventory of everything she had accomplished while that particular master's degree was being acquired, because she had not been asked, and because her answer was not going to be words. Her answer was going to be results, one at a time, in the correct language, in every room that needed her. Her new office was on the 11th floor. Modest, north-facing window, a desk that someone had wiped down recently, and not quite thoroughly enough. She noticed the residue at the back left corner from what they'd used, and did not mention this to anyone. A pothos in a terracotta pot, slightly root-bound, leaves a little dusty, the kind of plant that survives on neglect because it has simply decided to. She identified with it immediately. HR had been efficient. Laptop. Nameplate Nadine Okafor. Cultural Liaison International Affairs in clean black letters on brushed steel. A building access card with a photo that had been taken quickly and came out better than those things usually did. A filing system set up by someone who had done their best with uncertain parameters and made several creative organizational choices that Nadine quietly disassembled and rebuilt in her first 90 minutes. She used the clothing stipend carefully. 2 dark blazers, good pants, shirts that worked for long days, shoes that were serious without being theatrical. Nothing that looked like she was trying to be someone she wasn't. Everything that looked like she had already decided who she was. Graham Sellers appeared in her doorway on the first morning, without knocking. This was, she would come to understand, simply how Graham Sellers moved through the world. He had been head of international relations for 9 years, and in 9 years the doorways of this building had all been his by right of tenure, and no one had suggested otherwise. He was 47. The kind of build that suggested he had been an athlete in his 20s and had made peace with what came after. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is not unkind, but has simply never been required to factor someone like her into his calculations. "You're the new liaison," he said. "That's what I'm told." He had a clipboard. He consulted it, though he clearly already knew what it said. Experience in corporate environments? Only from the outside looking in. He did not find this amusing. Or if he did, he was keeping it to himself. He named 3 items: Italy reports, Dubai contracts, Sao Paulo follow-up action items, with the efficiency of a man delivering a test rather than a briefing. "Leave them on the desk," Nadine said. "I'll need a few hours to review the relationship history and context, but I can manage all 3. He set the folder on her desk, not gently, not aggressively, just set it down, and left without closing the door. She got up and closed it herself, then stood in the center of her office, the north-facing window, the dusty pothos, the folder on the desk, and gave herself exactly 10 seconds. Okay, she thought. Start with Italy. The Morocco meeting was Tuesday of the following week. Tate and Associates been attempting to formalize a North African distribution partnership for 11 months. 3 previous meetings, 2 different translators, 1 formal letter of apology for unspecified communication difficulties. 0 progress. Ideen spent the weekend reading everything available. The meeting notes, which were thin and optimistic in the way that meeting notes written by people who are hoping for the best tend to be. The contract drafts. The email chains, which told a different and more honest story than the meeting notes, as email chains invariably did. And then the things that weren't in any file. The cultural context. The specific architecture of formal negotiation in Moroccan business culture. The way that trust was not established through the agenda, but through what happened before the agenda and around it, and in the silences between items. The particular forms of address that signaled respect not for a person's title, but for their time and expertise, which were different things. The way that a meeting that began with genuine human acknowledgement could accomplish in 90 minutes, what a perfectly structured agenda could not accomplish in 3 sessions. This was what the files never contained. This was what she had always known. She prepared, not because she was nervous, because she cared about doing it right, which was a distinction she had maintained her whole life even when no one was watching whether she maintained it. Tuesday morning. The delegation from Casablanca arrived at 9:17. 4 people. Idris Ben Ali leading, late 50s. The bearing of a man who had sat across from a great many tables from people who smiled at him while meaning something different, and who had learned to read that gap early and never forgot it. His assistant Farida, early 30s, quick attentive eyes that were cataloging the room before she sat down in it. 2 senior procurement representatives who were watching Esdras to know how they should feel about things. Nadine was already in the conference room when they entered. She stood, did not wait at the table, walked toward them, and said Darija, not standard Arabic Darija, Casablanca Darija, specifically, with its particular texture and rhythm, the way it folded French words into Arabic grammar and created something that belonged entirely to a specific place and a specific people. The greeting that meant not merely hello, but I see you specifically. I have been paying attention to who you are. Idris Ben Ali stopped walking, completely. The way a person stops when something catches them off guard, in a direction they weren't expecting to be caught. He looked at her. She met his eyes. Steady, warm. Not performing warmth, actually warm, because she was genuinely glad he was there because she had spent a weekend preparing for this conversation. And preparation was its own form of respect, and she wanted him to feel that. Something in his face shifted. The way faces shift when a person encounters something that the situation did not lead them to expect, and it turns out to be good. The meeting ran 93 minutes. It was scheduled for 60. Nobody seemed to notice or mind. Nadine moved between English and Darija without experiencing it as movement. It was more like thinking in 2 registers simultaneously. The way a pianist plays with both hands and doesn't experience them as separate things. Graham Sellers was in the room. He'd insisted correctly, given his 9 years of contract history. He sat across from Nadine and watched her with an expression she couldn't entirely categorize. Not hostile, not approving, thinking, genuinely thinking. She would deal with that later. Farida asked a clarification question midway through. Inspection timelines. The specific worry about verification windows that Nadine recognized from the Dubai contract error she had flagged the previous week. She answered directly in Darija before catching herself and offering the English version. Russell, at the head of the table, nodded. Frida nodded more vigorously. The younger procurement representative she had learned his name was Yunus Thurdakesh originally, now based in Casablanca for 5 years. Made a joke. Dry, quick, in colloquial Darija, with a Marrakesh inflection that would have completely defeated a standard translator, and emerged from machine translation as something baffling and unintentionally rude. Pandine laughed, actually laughed, because it was genuinely funny, and then translated it, not just the words but the register, the specific flavor of dry humor that it carried, the self-taper quality that made it land correctly. Both sides of the table laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't happen in a meeting that is still being performed at each other, the kind that means, we are actually here together, in the same room, understanding the same thing. Russell looked at the laughter the way he had looked at it in Sao Paulo. Like a man watching something he recognizes as important but is still learning to name. After the meeting, lobby. Elevator doors closing behind the delegation as Patrick escorted them down. Idris Ben Ali paused. He had been about to step into the elevator. He stopped, turned back, walked to Nadine with the deliberateness of a man who has something to say and has decided to say it clearly. He spoke in Arabic, not Darija now but formal Arabic, which meant he wanted to be precise, wanted no ambiguity in the words, wanted what he said to land exactly as he intended it. We were going to withdraw, he said. I want you to know that, not because of the contract terms. The terms are workable. We were going to withdraw because in 3 previous meetings, no one in this building looked at us when they spoke. They looked at their documents, at their screens, at each other. He paused. When someone does not look at you, it means they do not believe you are fully present. Do you understand what that does to a negotiation? Yes, she said. I understand exactly what that does. Today was the first time we felt fully present in this room. He touched his chest briefly. Thank you for that. She held what he had said. Thank you for coming back, she said. After the previous meetings, thank you for giving it one more time. He looked at her a moment longer, then nodded and stepped into the elevator. And she stood in the lobby after the doors closed and thought about 14 years of being in rooms without being looked at. 14 years of fully present and completely unseen. She knew that feeling from the inside of it, which was exactly why she knew what it cost and what it was worth to fix. That evening at 7:19, her phone rang. Zora. She picked up immediately. Some reflexes don't retire. Mama. The particular texture in Zora's voice. Excitement moving too fast for its container. The specific quality of news that is too large to lead with directly. I got in. Nadine stopped moving. She was in her kitchen. She stopped completely. The Morocco program, she said. Yes, a breath that was almost a laugh. 6 months. The teaching hospital in Casablanca. The international health partnership that. She stopped because Nadine had made a sound, not a word, a sound. The kind that comes out when something lands directly on a place you didn't know, was still tender until the moment it was touched. Mama, are you? I'm fine. She sat down at the kitchen table. Baby, that's extraordinary. I've been waiting 6 months for the answer. I almost stopped checking the email, but you didn't stop. I couldn't stop. It's... Zora paused. Mama, it's the thing I've wanted. The international program. Working somewhere that isn't just. I know, Nadine said softly. I know what it means. Beat. Are you crying, Zora? No, she was not crying. She was doing something that existed in the immediate vicinity of crying without that technically crossing the border. I'm proud. That's all. I'm so proud of you. I know you are, but got this because of you. I got this because you read to me in French on Mondays and Arabic on Fridays and told me that language was the one thing no one could take from you after you'd learned it. A pause. I got this because I watched you keep learning even when you had every reason to stop. Every single reason to stop. Nadine pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. The old wood. The table she'd had since Zora was 6. Don't minimize it, Zora said quietly. I know you're about to. I'm not. You are. I can hear it. She wasn't wrong. She was 26 and she knew her mother and she wasn't wrong. I'm proud of you, Nadine said instead. Call me when you land. That's months away. I'll be tracking your flight from here anyway. You might as well call. Zora laughed. That laugh. The one Nadine had been listening to for 26 years and still felt somewhere under her sternum every single time. Love you, Mama. Love you, baby. She held the phone after hanging up. sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. She thought about Casablanca, about Idris Ben Ali, and the partnership they had just rebuilt in 93 minutes. About the teaching hospital that was now both the place her daughter was going and the place it helped make possible through a meeting that almost didn't happen. The world was not small. The world was exactly the size it had always been. She had just been looking at it from the wrong floor. The next morning there was an envelope on her desk. Cream paper. Her name in careful block letters. No return address. She opened it. A notacard. 4 lines handwritten in blue ink that had pressed hard into the paper the way writing presses when someone is feeling something while they do it. I have worked in this building for 11 years. I stopped expecting to be seen around year 4. Yesterday I watched you walk into that meeting. I stood a little taller today. Thank you. No name. She sat with it, turned it over. Nothing on the back. She placed it in the top drawer of her desk, not to analyze it, not to frame it, just to keep it. Because someone had needed to write it and she understood why, and the understanding was enough. Constance Albright called on a Thursday, through an assistant. Her own voice, warm as flannel, measured as a contractual clause. Nadine, I've been meaning to reach out since your appointment. I should have done it sooner, and I apologize for the delay. Not at all, Nadine said. I'd love to get acquainted properly. Coffee, perhaps. My private meeting room on 16. I'll have tea arranged, if you prefer. I think it would be valuable for both of us to know each other, given your new responsibilities. Given your new responsibilities. A phrase that could mean several things depending on the speaker's intent. Of course, Nadine said. I'd like that. They scheduled for the following Monday. After she hung up, Nadine sat for a long moment. She had remembered where she had seen the translation firm's logo, the vendor directory. A 3-ring binder kept at the administrative assistant station on 12. She had walked past it hundreds of times over 14 years. It lived on a corner shelf that didn't quite hold its weight, and she had straightened it reflexively every time she passed. She had looked inside it once, years ago, trying to find a maintenance vendor's contact number for a plumbing issue on the 6th floor. The translation firm was listed. Preferred partner. Contract established 2018. And in the small text beneath the listing, the kind of text that existed for administrative completeness, and that most people read the way they read terms and conditions, a note about the corporate parent entity, a Delaware holding company, 3 words and a number, the kind of name that is designed to be forgettable. She had not thought about it then. There had been no reason to think about it, but she was thinking about it now. She had opened her laptop 3 days ago and typed the holding company name into the Delaware State Business Registry. Public filings, the kind of information that was available to anyone who knew to look and had patience enough to navigate the database. She had patience. She had always had patience. The filing had come up in 4 minutes. Officers and directors, 3 names. The third was listed as founding shareholder through a secondary entity. 1 more layer, but only one. And the filing cross-reference made it navigable if you were willing to read carefully. Constance Albright. She had closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it again. She had opened a new document and started writing. Because the thing about finding something significant was that it was only as valuable as your ability to document it precisely and completely and without gaps that someone could argue through. By Thursday evening, the document was 19 pages. She was not finished. Monday, 16. The private meeting room was small and deliberately comfortable. Round table. 4 chairs upholstered in something expensive. A window facing east. Tea service already arranged. White porcelain loose leaf, the kind of detail that announced itself as a preference for it without making a thing of it. Constance Albright was 61. Silver hair cut close and clean. The posture of a woman who had spent 4 decades in rooms that required her to be the most prepared person present and had met that requirement consistently. She poured the tea herself, asked about the Morocco meeting with the engaged attention of someone who was genuinely curious, and also simultaneously learning something from every answer. Nadine answered warmly, accurately, carefully. And then Constance set her cup down, reached below the table, placed a folder between them. I wanted to share something with you, she said. A preliminary internal review. Nothing formal yet. Just an assessment of the new roles fit within our governance structure. Standard process whenever a position is created outside the usual channels. For your benefit as much as anything. Nadine looked at the folder, did not touch it. We want to make sure the structure supports your long-term success here, Constance continued. The we of someone who has decided to represent a larger authority without specifying who granted it. Nadine picked up the folder, read the first page, then the second. Then the executive summary at the front that she had deliberately saved for last, because summaries told you what someone wanted you to take away, which was not always the same thing as what the document actually contained. The cultural liaison role, as currently defined, presents governance challenges including the absence of educational prerequisites, lack of defined performance metrics, and structural overlap with existing departmental functions. Recommendation: formal review of role sustainability within current organizational framework. She read it without expression, turned to the appendix, which she had been expecting. A list of recommended alternative service providers for translation and language services. 6 companies. The fourth entry had a logo she recognized immediately. Small, elegant. The same logo from the vendor directory binder on 12. The same logo from the bottom right corner of page 9 of the Dubai contract. She closed the folder, set it back on the table, looked up at Constance, and Constance was watching her with a patient expression of a woman who had done this particular thing before, applied this particular form of gentle institutional pressure, and expected a specific response. Gratitude for the concern, perhaps. Or anxiety. Or both. Mixed together in the way that people mix them when they sense a threat they can't yet fully see. Nadine gave her neither. Thank you for sharing this, she said. Level. Warm even. The warmth was not performed. She genuinely appreciated knowing exactly what she was dealing with. I appreciate you taking the time. Constance blinked. One small, precise blink. The blink of someone whose expected response has not arrived. Of course, she said, recovering smoothly. I want you to succeed here, Nadine. It's important to me that. I understand. Nadine set cup neatly. On the saucer, not beside it. I should get back. I have the Italy contract ads to finish this afternoon, and the Dubai review is due to legal by end of week. She stood, smiled. The real smile, the one that reached her eyes. Thank you for the tea. It was genuinely excellent. She left, walked down the hall, pressed the elevator call button, waited. The doors opened. She stepped in, the chrome closed around her, and the moment she was alone in the last moving box, she exhaled. Long, controlled. The careful release of breath from a person who has been maintaining a specific composure for a specific reason, and can now briefly stop maintaining it. She pressed her back against the elevator wall, closed her eyes. 1 floor, 2 floors. She knows, Nadine thought. Or she's afraid I'm going to find something. Or she's been afraid of this since the moment Russell brought me upstairs, and she's been moving quietly ever since. Which means I need the document to be finished. Which means tonight. 3 floors. She opened her eyes, straightened. The doors opened on 11. She walked to the office, sat down, opened the laptop, opened the document, and kept writing. She called Zora that evening at 9:40. Not because she had decided to, because her hand picked up the phone and dialed before she had consciously chosen to. Hey mama, slightly sleepy, post-shift. A Arizona evening in her voice. Did I wake you? Almost. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Pause. Mama. Nothing is wrong, she said again, more precisely. I'm in a complicated situation at work. I'm handling it. I just needed to hear your voice. Zora was quiet for a moment. How complicated? She looked at the 21 pages on her screen. At the 6 years of contracts, she had mapped and cross-referenced and documented with the same thoroughness she had applied to everything in her life that mattered, whether anyone was watching or not. Manageable, she said. Another pause. Then Zora said something she hadn't prepared for. Do you remember what you told me the night before my first shift at the hospital, when I called you at midnight because I was terrified? Nadine was quiet. You said, you already know how to do this. You've been preparing your whole life. All that's happening now is that someone finally gave you the room. A breath. Mama, you already know how to do this. Nadine looked at the north-facing window of her office. Fort Worth at night, the particular scattered glitter of a mid-sized city doing its business after dark. Buildings lit from the inside. People in windows she couldn't see, doing things she couldn't know. All those rooms, all those languages. All those years of showing up for a building that had not once asked her name. I know, she said softly. Good, Zora said. Then go finish whatever you're working on. I can hear the laptop. Nadine looked at the keyboard. Love you, she said. Love you more, Zora said. Call me when it's done. She hung up, turned back to the screen. 21 pages. She needed 3 more. She started typing. She came in early. Not because anyone asked. Because early morning still belonged entirely to her. Before the emails. Before the calendar filled. Before the building gathered its weight of opinions and agendas, and people who had things to say about where she was sitting now compared to where she used to push her cart. 7:12. Lobby still dim. Bernard at his station, coffee already in hand. She stopped at the cart near the entrance. Got him a coffee without being asked. He looked at the cup. You don't have to do that anymore, he said. I know, she said. And kept walking. Because things you do because of who you are, not because of what you're owed. Not because of what anyone expects. Because of the person you decided to be a kid in Akron, Ohio a long time ago, when the decision had no audience and no reward, and was made anyway. That kind of decision doesn't expire. It doesn't change based on which floor you work on. Her desk had 24 pending items. She counted first, cataloged second, prioritized third, her father's system. Inherited so completely it no longer felt like inheritance. Dubai contracts, 3 review items, 1 flagged urgent by legal. Italy team, 2 memos, 1 mislabeled non-urgent by Graham Sellers that the original email's language directly contradicted. She opened that one first, and underneath everything else, open as a separate tab, her document, 24-page, every discrepancy mapped, every contract cross-referenced against the vendor dates, the pattern laid out with precision, not dramatic, not accusatory, documented. The way you document, when you know the truth, doesn't need decoration, only clarity. She had also added in the final pages the cumulative financial exposure, not estimated, calculated. Working from the contract values, the specific clause differences, the payment timeline implications of each mistranslation. She had checked the number 3 times before she was satisfied. She saved the document again, then once more to a personal drive that had nothing to do with Tate and Associates servers. Then she opened the Italy memo, because the work was the work, and she did not let one thing interfere with the other. Graham Sellers knocked on her door at 8:51. She noticed the knock, still noticed it every time. Italy memo, he said from the doorway. Done sending now. She clicked. The non-urgent flag on the vendor dispute. The counterpart's response window closes Friday. If we miss it, we lose the right to contest the shipping charge adjustment. A pause. I'll move it, he said. He didn't leave immediately. She had come to understand that Graham Sellers' version of saying something difficult was to stay in a doorway slightly longer than necessary and let the room do some of the work. She waited. The Benali call confirmed for Thursday, he said. I know, I'll take the lead. You take the history. Another pause. The recalibration kind. Fine, he said. Then, the Morocco numbers came in this morning. Preliminary agreement terms. He paused. There, I know, I read the email. He held the doorway one more moment. Sellers, she said. Yeah, thank you for knocking. He looked at her, held it. It matters, she said. Simply. He nodded once and left. This time he closed the door. Properly. Russell came by Thursday afternoon, coffee in hand. The ease of a man who has stopped needing to justify why he's somewhere. Anything you need, he said. She looked at him. The document was 24 pages. Every number verified. Every cross-reference checked. Every discrepancy documented with its source and effect and relationship to the pattern. She had one final confirmation to make. A holding company cross-reference she was running that afternoon. Without it, she had 19 clear facts and 1 assumption. She was not willing to bring assumptions into a boardroom. I'm good, she said. I'll let you know when that changes. He nodded at the door. Board meeting is the 15th. Constance has submitted a governance review of the cultural liaison role. I want you in the room. She kept her face level. Of course, she said. He left. She opened the document, started the final cross-reference. The 15th arrived the way important days arrive, without fanfare. Just another morning that happened to be the morning. November. Cold in the persistent Fort Worth weather. She dressed as carefully. Dark navy blazer, cream blouse, trousers with a clean line, shoes she could stand in for hours. She looked at herself in the mirror. 44 years old. Same face, same eyes that had read contracts in 8 languages and newspapers in 6 and bedtime stories in 4 and a thesis she'd never finished on a laptop in a box in a closet in Akron. You're ready, she told herself. Then honestly. You're scared, said. Then because both had always been true simultaneously. Go anyway. Boardroom 17. Real wood table. 12 people already seated. The particular air of a room where things get decided. She walked in with Russell, sat beside him at the center of the table, not the end. Not a corner, center. Constance Albright looked at her from across the table. Warm eyes, smile calibrated to exactly the correct depth. Nadine smiled back, same depth. 2 items ran first. Cultural liaison role, governance review. Constance? Constance stood. 14 slides, clean, professional. The presentation of someone who had prepared carefully and wanted it to look thorough rather than personal. She spoke for 14 minutes. The role created outside standard channels. Absence of educational prerequisites. Structural overlap. Sustainability questions. 14 minutes. Without once saying Nadine's name, which was a choice. Nadine noted it as a choice and filed what the choice meant. David Park, 70, the chairman said, "Thank you, Constance." Russell? Russell looked at Nadine, not asking permission. Acknowledging, she was already reaching for her folder. "If the board doesn't mind," she said, "I'd like to speak to this directly." She stood. No slides, no presentation. 2 sets of documents, printed, clipped, organized with the same care she had organized every supply closet in this building for 14 years. "I'm going to address the governance concerns," she said, "and then I'm going to share something else." She looked around the table, not performing confidence, grounded in it. Because she had verified every number 3 times and the document was complete, and she had done what she always did, come fully prepared. The cultural liaison role exists because this company had a measurable gap, not structural. Human, her voice stayed level and clear. The ability to communicate across language and culture is not a translation function. It's a relationship function. For 11 months before I joined this team, 3 consecutive attempts to build the North African partnership failed. Not because the terms were wrong, but because no one in those rooms could tell the difference between what was being said and what was being meant. She placed the first set of documents on the table. 1 per board member. In 4 weeks, Morocco moved from stalled to active. Sao Paulo has a standing weekly meeting. The Italian vendor dispute resolved in 48 hours because I read the original language of the disagreement. These are outcomes, measurable ones. She opened the second folder. Now, the other thing, Constance's face did not change, which told Nadine exactly how prepared she had been for this possibility. Since joining this role, I've reviewed every international contract executed by this 2018 since 2018 that was translated by the current preferred language services vendor. She addressed David Park directly, not Constance. There are 11 contracts with translation discrepancies. They are not random. They follow a consistent pattern. Mistranslation of payment timing and liability clauses in a direction systematically favorable to the counterpart. Silence. I've documented each instance, original language, provided translation, correct translation, financial effect. The cumulative exposure is approximately $0.3 million over 6 years. Some realized, some contingent liability still available to the counterpart. The number settled into the room like something heavy being set down. The translation vendor operates under a Delaware holding company. The registered officer filings are public record. One of the founding shareholders, reached through a single intermediate entity in the 2019 cross-referenced filing, is a current member of this board. No one moved. She looked at Constance. Constance looked back at her. The room held its breath, and then Constance set her pen down, slowly. The way you set something down when you have decided that whatever it represented is no longer something you are going to hold. She looked at the documents on the table, didn't pick them up. She already knew what they said. She had always known what they said. Then she looked up at Nadine, not the warm, calibrated look from her. Something stripped of that. Something that was, for the first time in all their interactions, simply direct. Nadine watched the question move behind Constance's eyes. How did you find it? I asked aloud. Some things you don't ask aloud in a room with 11 witnesses when the answer will only confirm what the documents already prove. I'll need to consult with counsel, Constance said. To the room, to no one specifically. And she walked out, clean, quiet, door closing without a sound. Later, much later, Nadine would think about that look, the unasked question. And she would think, because I read. Because I have always read. Because reading carefully do when no one is looking, and when everyone is looking and every hour in between. That's how. That has always been how. 8 seconds of silence. David Park looked at the documents, then at Russell, then at Nadine. I think we'll need to reschedule the governance review item. I think that's wise, Russell said. A pause. Welcome to the team, David Park said, looking at Nadine directly. Properly. She sat back down, exhaled. Not for the room, just let the air out. The specific release of breath from a person who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has with both hands finally set it down. The program launched in January. Overlooked and outstanding. 12 initial participants. 2 from her former custodial team. 3 from facilities. A man named Robert from the mailroom who had been applying his organizational mind to sorting mail for 9 years, and who turned out, given a different kind of problem, to have the most structured thinking in the building. She taught the first language session herself. Tuesday morning. Conference room 2B. 12 people. Some in work uniforms, some in street clothes. All carrying the alertness of people who have been told for a long time that rooms like this aren't meant for them and are waiting carefully to find out if that's still true. We start with phrases, she said. The ones that make a person feel seen rather than processed. She looked around the table. What's the first thing you'd want to say to someone who walked into this building speaking only Mandarin and couldn't find where they were going? Silence. Then from the far corner, Priya, facilities team 29, who had the same quality of quiet attentiveness that Nadine recognized from a long time ago in a mirror. She said, I'd want to say, you're in the right place. Let me help you. Nadine looked at her. That's it, she said. That's where we start. The conference room on 8 got a new plaque in February. No ceremony, just a maintenance crew swap on a Tuesday morning. The ground floor room. Below it, smaller, because everything that matters begins somewhere. Nadine found it on her way to the Benali call. Stopped, read it. Bernard came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. You see it? Just now. He stood beside her. Read it too. Good name, he said. Yes, she said. It is. A moment. 2 people who had been in this building a combined 30 years standing in front of a plaque that said something true. Bernard, she said. Yeah. The overlooked and outstanding program. We're starting a facilities leadership track in March. Logistics, oversight, building operations management. She looked at him. You know how this building actually works better than anyone on the management floor. You've known for 16 years. He was quiet. I'll think about it, he said. She nodded, walked toward the elevator. Behind her, quietly, she heard him say it to himself. 16 years. Not bitterly, just clearly. The way you say something when you are finally letting yourself see it. In March, she spoke, in Cincinnati, International Logistics Leadership Summit. Not as a story, as a subject matter expert. The title on the program read Cultural Communication in Global Supply Chain Relations. 800 people. She walked to the podium, looked at the room. I want to ask you one question, she said. Answer it honestly, not to me. Just to yourself. The room settled. When is the last time you asked the person who cleans your office what their name was? Not as courtesy. Because you were genuinely curious about who they were. Silence. I know that person. I was that person. For 14 years. In a building with 340 employees. I spoke 8 languages fluently and helped save a contract worth over $1 million using a notepad from a supply closet. Because no one thought to ask whether I could help. She paused. No one thought to ask anything at all. The room was very still. This is not a story about exceptional circumstances. It is a story about a habit. The habit of deciding what a person is worth before you've spoken to them, before you've looked at them, before you've asked. She held the room. And I am here to tell you, as someone who lived on the other side of that habit for a very long time, it is costing you, not as metaphor. Literally, in contracts, in partnerships, in opportunities that walk through your lobby every morning and you did not see. She stepped back. Change the habit, she said. Ask the name. Listen to the answer. Be surprised by it. 4 seconds of silence. Then the room stood. Afterward, a young man found her in the lobby. Mid-tinnies. Conference lanyard. The look of someone who had been building towards something for 20 minutes. And finally decided to go through with it. Hopped in front of her. My mother cleans hotel rooms, he said. 18 years. And she speaks 5 languages. Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and some Arabic. She learned them on her own. Because she loves it. His voice did something he hadn't planned for it to do. I used to be embarrassed to say that. I thought people would think less of her. Less of us. Nadine looked at him. She thought about a kitchen in Akron. A man who read 3 newspapers in 3 different languages and said, "The same story sounds different depending on who's telling it. You need all the versions to understand any of them." "Tell me about her," she said. He blinked, like nobody had asked him that before. She knows everyone's name. The guests, the staff, everyone. She reads on the bus. Even after a double shift, she reads. He paused. "She's the most curious person I know." Nadine put her hand briefly on his arm. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from," she said. "The only thing worth being ashamed of is looking through someone and not seeing them." He nodded. Couldn't quite speak. She walked out into the March air. She flew home that evening, got back to Fort Worth late, drove from the park and ride in the cities that has finished its day, but not quite started tomorrow. Her apartment, the kitchen table, the light above it. She opened the drawer in her bedroom, her old badge, employee number 0847, small scratch on the lower left corner from a cart handle in 2016. Her photo, a woman in a moment she hadn't fully prepared for. She held it. Then she took out her current badge, Nadine Okafor, Cultural Liaison, International Affairs. She set them side by side on the kitchen table, both of them, not choosing between them, not making one mean more than the other. Because the woman in the burgundy uniform was this woman. This woman was the one who had mopped that lobby. They were not before and after. They were the same room, carrying the same languages, the same love of words, the same habit of noticing what everyone else walked past. She had not become someone new. She had always been this. The world had simply, finally turned around and looked. And when it did, when someone turned around and asked, "Who are you, actually? Who are you?" She had been ready. She had been ready for 14 years, the whole time.